everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Samantha and I'm in client services here at the Retirement Group. I moderate these weekly webinars. In just a moment, we're going to be joined by our advisor, Patrick Ray, and he's going to be speaking to Northrop Grumman employees about the emotional journey you embark on as you select your retirement date and how these emotions could potentially affect your investment decisions as well as your financial future. Before I bring Patrick on, however, I would like to just remind you very quickly that although we work very closely with both active and retired members of Northrop Grumman, we are not affiliated nor endorsed whatsoever by Northrop Grumman. The Retirement Group is a completely independent group of financial advisors, so please keep that in mind. After Patrick's presentation, I will jump back on with him very quickly to ask him any of the questions you may have entered into the Q&A chat. Please feel free to ask away. It is 100% anonymous, and Patrick will answer as many as he can, time permitted, of course. And now that I've got all that boring stuff out of the way, let's bring on our speaker today, Patrick Ray. Hi, Patrick.
Thank you for the introduction, Sam, and welcome everyone to today's presentation. Today I have a topic that, boy, oh boy, it deserves all kinds of attention with respect to one of the most important financial decisions that you have to make, and the emotions and a lot of times the anxiety, and unfortunately, sometimes what leads to regret or sadness because of decisions that are made from either inaccurate information or the lack of planning. And so, boy, we've got a lot to cover with respect to those topics because we like to get into that with our folks to provide them as much value as possible. And so, in case you are new to our webinars, we are the Retirement Group. We've been in business for over 30 years, and we have a team of combined professionals, of which I'm one. I've been in business for close to 25 years now, and we have offices all across the country with the ability to help individuals who are currently or had been working for Fortune 500 companies and had either planned on or are transitioning into retirement. And one of the things that you might find useful amongst the webinar topics that we cover on a regular basis is there'll be some links into the chat that you can get access to some of the things we've recorded in the past. So I encourage you to check those out at your own leisure, as well as if you find time, you're welcome to reach out to us and I'll give you the way to do that at the end of the presentation today. In an effort to do something called a financial or a cash flow analysis. And this happens to be a complimentary service that we offer to our folks to kind of help them vision what retirement looks like. And so we either A, confirm that they're on track to meet their goals at the given timeframes that they're hoping to ride off into the sunset and become happily retired, or we let them know where their shortfalls are and a way to actually get them to, work towards the things that need to be improved upon so they can meet their ultimate goals in the long run. If you're not already following us on our LinkedIn page, I encourage you to do that. So you can take a screenshot of this QR code on the screen as we speak, and it will lead you to our LinkedIn page, which we have a ton of up-to-date and relevant information about a myriad of topics similar to our webinar series. And so one of the things that over my career I've found the most helpful for people who are transitioning into a successful retirement is to create a checklist. And as rudimentary as this may sound, you can literally bring out a yellow pad and start writing down some of the things that that you and or your family need to address in an effort to lead into and be comfortable with your decision that says, this is the date I'm eventually retiring after 30 or 35 or 40 plus years of work history. And so some of those things include, but they are obviously not limited to, the comfort of your decision. And a lot of times that ties to the emotions of which we're going to talk about today, and specifically get into a few of the examples about what we see that could create some issues if we don't address them in the most appropriate way possible. Of course, decreasing the risk in amongst the time leading up to and beyond retirement are obviously one of the biggest concerns for our folks that we speak to. But amongst that is the volatility that's associated with either your working environment and or the stock market, or a combination of both, that leads into this decision, which ultimately will reflect on how or what we can expect when we ultimately do decide to retire. Increasing retirement income and maximizing that is clearly number one priority for all folks, because obviously you're giving up the revenue stream that's coming into the household that you're currently working for, and you're going to ultimately lead back to and lean on the things that you've worked an entire lifetime to accumulate. So retirement income and maximizing that in all aspects is clearly a priority. Decreasing taxes and penalties, this is a multifaceted or multi-leveled issue because there are potential penalties and issues related to not just your age because of when you could potentially start the need for income, but also correlated to some of you that have pensions and some of your companies that are penalizing you because you're not a certain age or you hadn't met a certain criteria of age and work history to meet their deferred penalty-free options. So those are obviously part of a multitude of issues that we run into on a regular basis, as well as the taxation of what you can expect. And for many of the folks that are on this webinar, most of the resources that they'll ultimately rely on are a bucket or pool of capital that has never been through the tax system because it was correlated to your 401k, or for those of you who are lucky enough to have a lump sum pension and you decide to take that as a retirement distribution option, the taxes are going to be a concern, right? And so you're going to have an effective pool of capital that has never cycled through the tax system before that is going to be an ongoing issue for the remaining balance of your retirement years. And then maybe the most important part is the investment philosophy that I know goes a long way with helping folks be comfortable and addressing the emotional part of what do I do when I ultimately don't have a paycheck any longer and I need to withdraw monies and in hopes of making sure that my spouse and I have resources for as long as we are going to live. And so that is clearly a need for something that needs to be addressed, obviously, and the best course of action to do that is to develop an investment philosophy with a team of advisors that are looking out for your best interest. And so when we talk about the sources of where you're going to ultimately rely on sources of funds and income, you're going to pretty much rely on three. Most of us are going to rely on three of these things. Social Security is one. You might be lucky enough to have a pension, so pensions are another, and then your 401k or your other outside investments that you may have accumulated over your working years. And so each one of these has an intricate part of what role they play in the aspects of what you can expect from where your sources of income are going to come from. And you might benefit from understanding the protocol of the options for Social Security as an example of when to take it. And so this falls back, as many things do from our perspective, to the cash flow analysis and ensuring that you're making the most important decisions for a vital period of your time for you and your family. And so these are what the three sources of funds typically look like. And when you transition into retirement, typically what we talk about are the courses of action that are necessary for you to wrap your arms around the risk and all of the things that are associated with managing your own money if you're choosing to do that. A lot of folks choose to reach out to folks like us. And so we correlate that to some things that you want to know about from a behavioral perspective, because this seems to be a trigger for us to have a smooth and very calm ride for most of our retirees when we can get our arms around what we're speaking of when we talk about the theories of finance. And so there are two levels to the theory of finance, and one of them is the standard theory of finance. And so if you're an investor, you can vision the standard theory of finance very simply. You're making rational decisions, and you do that after considering all information that is known and factual. So in other words, you've got all the information in front of you to make a decision that you can think about from a rational perspective, and this is how you're going to proceed going forward. Now, from a stock market perspective or from a financing market perspective, the markets under the standard theory of finance are quickly known to incorporate all information, and they're factual in context. So what that means is that it will technically represent the true value of the potential security or stock or bond that you're considering on buying. So this is kind of what the standard theory of finance technically looks like. Now, the catch is we're not robots. And as humans, we have a tendency to allow our emotions to drive our financial decisions. And this, if all things were equal, we would want to avoid at all costs, which is the inability to think from a business and focus on the facts of why we're doing something from an investment perspective or from an income perspective or from a longevities issue, or there's all kinds of measures that we need to consider. But the behavioral theory of finance provides us an overlay to what we would think would be rational and standard. And so unfortunately, we know in real time investors are not rational. We don't typically think on a rational basis. We have a known party of friends that are coming over for the weekend, and we're looking to upgrade our television. And so, boom, we just go out and we buy a television. And sometimes we do that on the credit of the store that we're buying the television from. And so that's an emotional and impact type decision. And so, from a financial planning perspective, for sure, we've got to be careful that we're not making decisions like this because it could impact not just the here and now, but what means the most to you and your family for the next 20 and 30 and 40 years and beyond. And so, because we're known to not often act rationally, that we're often acting on impersonal or imperfect information, which is another problem. And so, if we don't have all the facts, then it's really going to be tough for us to make a decision that we know we're comfortable with based on our goals and our objectives and things like this. Now, from a stock market perspective, this is really going to be hard for us to beat if at all times we've got both the standard and behavioral theories of finance affecting what happens on a daily basis, which it does, which is why you see the stock market go up and down on a daily basis. And so, in the short term, there are immense amounts of abnormalities and things that would create fluctuations. And we're seeing some of them as we speak today with what's happening overseas and with respect to the economic condition and interest rates. And we have an upcoming presidential election, which has affecting or could affect some of those things. And so you've got a number of variables that are involved in on the market end of things, which makes it tough for us to impact our planning process from a behavioral perspective because we know these things fluctuate the markets on a regular basis. And so what we want to do today is focus on our behavior and what we can control, because the importance of our behavior and what we control, we can get better understand ourselves. We can better implement a plan that's consistent with all the things that we know that are important to us. And so, in doing so, we might be able to intelligently figure out when the best day to leave the payroll is. I can't tell you how many times over my career we've talked about with a numerous amount of folks with respect to when they plan on retiring, and they don't know. And the reason they don't know is because they're not informed enough to know this is the best time to leave based on their own goals and objectives, like the timing of their retirement or what's relevant to their age penalties for their specific plan for their company that they work for. So there's a lot of variables and caveats to helping what might be the most important thing for many of you, which is to understand the best day that you can walk away from the company with the most money. It also helps us develop solid and sound investment strategies. I mean, think about what we've recently went through here in just the most recent 24 to 36 months with COVID and with the interest rate issues that have impacted the economic conditions and the stock market specifically, and then what's happening overseas. And you've got all these different things. How many times have we wanted to address and or change the investment philosophy because of these short-term things that have occurred, right? So I get calls on a regular basis that say, man, the stock market's going sideways. Is it time to get out of the stock market and get into cash so we can help, create a floor for what's in your 401k because you can't afford to lose any money? And while I can appreciate the emotional attachment that you may have to that, that may very well not be the best thing for you to do. And one of the most important things for us is to sit back and make sure that we develop a plan that's consistent with these things that are important to you. So if you still feel the need to make adjustments to your 401k as a general example of what's going on with respect to the stock market, then I would argue that your investments inside your 401k are invested far too aggressively. And we need to step back and take an analysis of how those interact with your goals and objectives and then address that accordingly. So it also allows us to stay the course. I mean, I can't tell you how often where we look back, 3 to 5 years from now, and the stock market is more valuable today than it was then. And so think about all the variables of different things that have changed and impacted the stocks and different markets to swing from one respect to the other. And what that had meant 5 years ago, it's still more valuable today in many cases. And so if we would have just simply stayed the course with a sound plan, it might have been the best course of action, which often is to do nothing as opposed to feeling the need to react to everything that goes on. And so in general, this is clearly going to give you a better overall experience with respect to your plans and what's happening to your investments specifically. Now, on the behavioral side, there are a few things that I'd like to point out that are relevant to some things that we see on a regular basis. And some of these behavioral characteristics are referred to as like loss aversion and narrow framing and anchoring and mental accounting and hurting and regrets. Media response is a big one. So we're going to talk about a couple of these things, okay? First of all, hurting. The best example that we have of hurting would be to consider what is relevant today as, for example, the hottest investment that you can buy. Okay, so this slide shows a outlook of a 3, 5, and 10-year window of what happens to a five-star mutual fund. So if you're familiar with Morningstar, Morningstar is a rating system that rates investments and specifically mutual funds. And so what this analysis is showing us is that we have 100% of the analyzed mutual funds that were five-star rated at the time of the analysis, and then how they performed over a 3, 5, and 10-year period of time. And ultimately, in the end, only 14% of those hot funds or what was the thing to buy at the time is still relevant to be equivalent to a five-star performing mutual fund. And so this is disturbing to the extent where a lot of folks think that that's the time to be buying into these particular investments. And we can show you heaps of data that show that that's probably not the smartest thing for you to do in the grand scheme of things. And so clearly, this is one of the behavioral characteristics that we see on a regular basis, and maybe the most common one to avoid at all costs if it's possible. The only way to do that, of course, is to have a plan, and that's what we're here to do to help. So, loss aversion is another one. And how many times do we speak to people on a regular basis that say we're only willing to gain 2 to 2.5 times, which is effectively the average of what they would risk in an effort to be comfortable placing that bet, because most people don't like to lose money. So if you're trying to make a decision on where to invest your money in the stock market, some folks are only comfortable knowing that they're going to increase their money by a certain percentage or by a certain level of multiples in an effort to be comfortable saying that's the best thing for us to do. And if we step back and look at a financial plan and we do a cash flow analysis, and we know that between you and your spouse, you have a likelihood of living for 34 years in retirement, then we've got to ensure that we're doing things to help you outpace inflation over that 34-year window of time. And so loss aversion is something that we see on a regular basis that helps us put together a plan and certainly outline some of the concerns that folks have with respect to investing their money. So let's talk about some of the considerations that you need to have before you leave your job, okay? What we want to do at first, if at all possible, is assess the real motivation. Like, what are you doing leaving your job? Like, why are you doing that? And we hope to have a very prudent and very good answer as to what the repercussions are of leaving our job. Because you're ready, because it's time, because you can afford to do that, because your spouse is choosing or asking you to do so you can spend more time with the kids and grandkids, etc. So for whatever your reason is, we just want to make sure that we discuss potential adjustments that could be involved in the timing of when you leave the payroll. And you also want to do a very comprehensive comparison on evaluating the compensation package of what you're getting from all your benefits and your current job and what it pays you, et cetera. And then not just what that means to you today, but what it means or impacts to your overall retirement needs, and specifically your capital that you've built up and worked an entire life to accumulate, and how that would be affected by your decision to leave the payroll. And then we talked a little bit about emotions today, and this is a really big factor, which is let's make sure that we recognize the concerns of you working for a company for 30 or 35 or 40 years, and you're getting up and you're doing the same thing day in and day out for this window of time, and what that might mean to you if you decide that you're no longer going to work. And as odd as it may sound, I know for a fact there are people that are still on the payroll today because they don't want to deal with that emotion, and they don't want to deal with the ramifications of what happens because they don't have very many hobbies, and maybe they don't have a ton of family, and work is their only thing. And so even though they could potentially afford to retire, what they do is they choose to stay on the payroll because they're allowed to do so, and they're still a good working asset to the company. And so in doing so, they are immune to this potential emotional involvement of what is next. And so that is a big thing. And so I absolutely think that that should be part of the planning process and that should absolutely be addressed. And so we want to optimize the timing. I had spoke about that at the beginning. Like that's one of the most important things for many of you who are watching the webinar today, which is to pick the right time to leave the payroll and then correlate that to some ancillary things like your bonuses and vesting dates and potential healthcare things. Like, for example, if you're planning on needing knee surgery, maybe you want to get the knee surgery prior to you leaving the payroll, and understand what the pros and cons of doing that is, if you're able to get disability or how that may work or fold into your overall planning process. And then there's some loose ends that often need to be tied up. Like, for example, the outstanding reimbursements that you may get from flexible spending accounts if you're required to spend those funds before the end of the year, as well as healthcare savings accounts, which many of you have switched to the HSA versions of being able to save for your future retirement. And we, by the way, we have a webinar on the series of HSA stuff and what that means to you overall in a retirement planning perspective, especially because those rules have recently changed. So you may want to check that out. And then try at best to determine whom the best aspect of the team that you're looking to engage with would be as a partnership, so that you have a comfortable transition during this window of moving from an employee to being a retiree. And so, of course, that is all part of building a successful future. And we want to reflect on the skills and whatever it is that's required to have gotten you to this point, and you want to make sure that you're comfortable giving those up for whatever reason. And in the needs or aspects of moving on, some of you may be considering changing your careers or just moving on to a different opportunity, which is great. Just understand that there's some caveats to that and how that may impact you. And often we see this in this transition where people are getting laid off or they're getting surplused from their positions at their current employer. And it puts them in a tough spot because they hadn't planned on retiring. And some of them are my age or younger. At 52 years old, it would be pretty unfortunate if I was told I didn't have a job and I wasn't planning on retiring at my age. And so from that aspect, we've got a lot to consider on what's necessary to move or transition into a whole nother world of what you're giving up, like seniority and vacation, and what all those things mean to the big picture of the planning process. I had mentioned about the self-care thing, just like surgeries and things that you would probably already consider, obviously, especially if they're bothering you from a surgery perspective or some kind of medical procedure that you might want to consider. Those should be considered in many cases if you can do it while you're still on the payroll before you decide to transition off into either another payroll job or into retirement. And then the goals that you have could be established through a plan, through a partner of someone like us, for example. We're here to help. And in case you don't know what some of these general things are, we can help you facilitate your concerns and thoughts into an overall plan, because that is easily, in my experience, one of the best tools that you can have at your disposal, which is to transition into a successful retirement by understanding the things that are important to you. And some people need help in an effort to develop that. And so we have a cost effective way to do that, because we do it on a no expense basis to you. So quick takeaways from what we had to talk about today is, if you hadn't already figured out, you try at your very best to remove your emotional decisions from your financial and retirement planning decisions. Listen, folks, retirement is the second most stressful event that you'll ever have to go through. And unfortunately, number one is losing a spouse. Okay. So this is a really, really big deal. And it's very, very emotional and stressful to many of the folks that we talk to. And so you have to do your best at all costs to remove the concerns that you have about emotionally making one of the most important and biggest financial decisions that you ever have to make. Understand the pros and cons of either leaving or staying, right? It may be time to do some self-reflection as to what the best thing for you to do is for your family, for your health, for your financial well-being. And even though you may have had it up to your eyeballs with your company at 58 years old, maybe the best thing for you to do is to work until you're 60 or 62 or even 65. And so the planning process hopefully will help you pinpoint the best time to retire. And that's the purpose of one of many purposes of going through the analysis, which we're delighted to do. And then make sure you do your homework, right? Make sure you take the time to consider all of the things and others that we have spoke about today to help you plan and achieve financial success in retirement. Because most people who are over the age of 50 do not have a written financial plan. And there's just no excuse for that because we do it for free. And so we're willing to spend some time with you if you're willing to spend some time with us. Okay. And the way you do that is by reaching out to us at either um, emailing us at info@theretirementgroup.com. You can call our 800 number, which is 800-900-5867. And or you can take a picture of the QR code that's on the screen to the left. And what that will do is get you to a calendar where you can choose a 15-minute interval of time at with an advisor that's close to you. And so we can do our best to start facilitating the ideas and things that would help you gauge where you're at financially and how to transition into a successful retirement. And lastly, again, here's the LinkedIn page if you're not already following us on LinkedIn. So I encourage you to do that for sure. And with that, what I'd like to do is turn the presentation back over to Sam to see if there's any questions that we may be able to answer before we let you go for the afternoon. Sam?
Hey, Patrick. Yes, let's answer some questions.
Okay.
Number one, I'm feeling somewhat betrayed by my company's return to office policy. How can I form a solid plan to navigate toward SPE if I'm laid off?
Ugh. Wow, how brutal is it to just be told that, it's okay for you to work from home, and then all of a sudden, bam, you got to go back to work. And I know also on top of that, some of you are dealing with other issues of your jobs being transitioned into a different location, which is even worse, right? So, look, the best advice I can give you is when you're when these needs are in the forefront, right? It creates some urgency. And what you have to be careful of is using your emotions, as we talked about today, in allowing that to drive your decisions. And so one of the most important things you can do is to create a retirement plan that's consistent with all of your goals and objectives as we speak today, and then simply use that as a template to ensure that you're on track to be comfortable whenever it is that you decide to retire. And so everyone is different. Everyone has different needs and they have different timetables and they have different planning aspects. Some are married, some are not, and some have children, some do not. And so all of these create different variables for every single person. So it's really important for you to take into consideration what's important to yourself and your family and your situation and build off of that by creating a plan that's consistent with all these things that are important to you. So I hope that helps.
Ready. Thank you, Patrick. This next one, I'm a little embarrassed that my 401k declined so much compared to some of my colleagues. What can I do to help alleviate some of this stress?
Boy, this is tough, right? I mean, I think the first thing I want to say is you have to be very careful about comparing your financial situation to anyone else's, right? Because that other person may not have told you that they put all of their money in one given environment or one given area of the stock market. And maybe at the time you talked to them, that particular area was doing well when the other areas of the stock market was not doing well. So it looks like he or she is a hero from the decision that they made, right? So from a declines perspective, there's a couple of things going on. Maybe you have company stock inside your 401k and that company stock is not performing as the markets are performing, or it's either better or worse. And so that would be something that might be a red flag. If you're concerned about that, we would probably want to take a look at that. And then maybe even as a holistic view, concern ourselves with if we're just simply taking too much risk overall, right? I had mentioned this a few minutes ago, which is you got to be careful about feeling the need to react to every piece of information that happens on a daily basis, especially with respect to what's happening to the stock market. And so because of that, we want to make sure that we've got a sound plan and that your 401k has the solutions within the framework of that account to meet your overall plan. And that way you don't feel the need to be concerned or have anxiety because maybe your account is down a little bit because frankly, the stock market is down. And so that might be a normal course of action in a given day or week or month, for example. So I would say in this particular case, I probably would encourage you to do an analysis on the actual holdings that you have versus the risk that you're comfortable taking and confirm that those two things are in line with one another. That's for sure.
I do apologize if you're hearing the jets go over us at the moment. We are near Miramar Air Force Base, and I think they're
Yeah.
They're flying around. So I apologize
Ah,
if you can hear that a little too loudly. All right, Patrick, thank you. Number three, with the stock market's downturn and the issues going on overseas, it's causing me some anxiety. Would it make more sense to push back my retirement date?
yeah, this is a good one, right? I mean, we're getting ready to run into a presidential election, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on overseas, as you pointed out. Um, Listen, I would never tell anybody that it's a mistake to continue to work in the general aspect of planning, right? If you're working, yeah, I mean, in theory, you're bringing in the funds that you need to live off of, which allows you to postpone removing any of your capital from any of your investments. So, frankly, the longer you do that, the better. Forget the fact that there's weird stuff happening overseas, and we're in a kind of an odd time in our economic condition, et cetera. I think the bigger picture is making sure that when you're ready to stop bringing in income, it's because you're comfortable relying on the sources and things that you've accumulated over your working years for the rest of your life. And so that's a big decision. And that's why I said, from an emotional perspective, this is one of the most important things that you have to decide on. So, because the stock market is down, look, the stock market's going to be down when you're retired too. So let's be crystal clear. If you have money or the need to have money in the stock market to help you outpace inflation during your lifetime, we can almost guarantee, because there's not very many guarantees in our business, but the stock market is going to change values, and it's going to happen when you're retired as well. So you have to be prepared for that on both fronts, right? On the front of when you're working, as well as when you lead into retirement. And so I think that the big picture of how those interwork or intertwine with your goals and objectives is the bigger concern. And there may need to be an adjustment made on either the level of risk you're willing to take in your assets or the timing of when you decide to leave the payroll, because it just may simply be best for you to keep working for a while.
All right. Fourth one, I empathize with some of my past coworkers who are now struggling retirees. How can I remain hopeful yet rational about my own decision to retire?
Well, that's a great question. Again, I would caution you to be careful about friends and coworkers or anybody else who retired or who's still working and how they have their 401k invested or what they're doing with their retirement, et cetera. Because what's most important is what's best for you and what's best for your family. So, having said that, though, I can appreciate that you empathize with some coworkers who maybe they were asked to leave the payroll, and maybe those people, in addition, couldn't find employment. Because I know some folks like that. I have them as clients, and so that's pretty unfortunate, right? So, I think that in the big picture, having some empathy with those folks is clearly understandable for sure. But yet, how that applies to you is questionable, right? I'm not really sure, because maybe the need for your income is 2 times greater than the person that you're referring to who actually retired, or vice versa. Their need for income was twice as much as yours. And they were single where you're married and you have an additional spouse's retirement to help offset some of those concerns. So there's, a lot of moving parts and a bunch of variables that are involved to concern yourself with. And I think the most important thing you can do is to do your best to create a foundation with the planning in place so that you're comfortable that when the decision arises, or maybe the decision is made for you because you expected to retire at 60, but at 58, the company told you that you had to go. And if that's the case, you're prepared at least, right? So maybe you need to get work for 2 more years or so, or maybe you're just ready to fast forward your retirement and start a few years earlier. But either way, the planning process is the easiest solution to all these concerns for the most part.
Alrighty, Patrick. I think we only have time for one more. So there is going
Okay.
to be a link in the chat that you can click to book an appointment with Patrick or one of his colleagues after this. I do apologize if we didn't get to your questions today. We like to respect your afternoon. Patrick, last one. I have some fears about inflation affecting my 401k. What steps can I take to safeguard it?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, look, history has shown us that the best tool in our arsenal to outpace inflation is the stock market, right? The problem is that some people don't have the appetite for that, and I can totally appreciate that, right? So what we have to do is find the mix of what's right for you. And so while the unfortunate scenario of declines that occur, which happen obviously, and some of the recent activity has shown us that with what the stock market is doing as we speak today. But knowing that over your lifetime, the best thing to do is to have exposure to something that can outpace inflation might be the most valuable tool for us. And the way we figure that out is to do some planning and to do some homework and to see what your needs are, how much money you've saved, where it can come from. Do you have a spouse that has anything to add to the overall planning process? When the right time is to consider Social Security, and many of other things that would all entail an important part of the overall planning process. And so until we get a handle on that, it's really tough to say what the best short-term course of action is. And what we would hope to do is to have a good, solid formed plan for the long term and adjust accordingly as we need it, as life events happen and as things occur.
All right, Patrick, that was it.
Great. Well, we certainly appreciate your time this afternoon, folks. Thank you very much for joining us. We certainly hope you got some value out of what we had to talk about today. And until next time, we'll see you. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Patrick.